What did we learn from Brian Schottenheimer's first draft as a head coach? We'll tell you next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox. No console needed. Head over to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. We are answering your mailbag questions today, and this first one comes from Goran. He wants to know, did we learn anything from Brian Schottenheimer and Matt Eberflus's first draft together with the Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And I think the kind of interesting part of it is like trying to parse like what was specific to this year and like what is a, kind of Brian Schottenheimer draft maxim, right? I do think that the high character thing does probably fall under that category, right? Like of things that Brian Schottenheimer is looking to do with his draft picks, like traits and aspects about his of Brian Schottenheimer draft pick. Like I think if right now if we were going to put anything on it, I think it has to be that, just because they harp so much on it. And it does seem like a, philosophical from the coach down kind of thing. A lot of the other stuff, like, obviously they kind of concentrated on getting a little bit beefier on the, or at least beefing up the offensive and defensive lines. That was kind of a key thing that with their first few picks. That may just be, team specific to what this team needs, or trying to upgrade those spots, for this team. So it's tough to kind of call that a trend at this point. But I do think that the high character, high football character type guys, sort of a la Jason Garrett, I think is kind of more back in style with Schottenheimer.
What about with draft rumors? Because we heard Tyler Booker's name kind of the last week going into the draft. We heard McMillan for months, and it sure seems like that's who the Cowboys were going to take at number 12, Tetsuo McMillan, if he were going to fall. I don't know if this current regime is all that interested in smoke screens. Maybe they're just going to tell us what they're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that we did get. I mean, you're right. We did kind of get some information late, but I feel like we also got a lot of information. So I think
it's just hard to tell which of it is agent driven and which of it is team driven.
Yeah, and I think that's what they're relying on at this point, is that there's just like a deluge of information coming from all sources, and it's hard to parse what's what. I think with McCarthy, we saw like just very little information coming out. It felt right. I don't know if that was any more or less effective, honestly, than kind of throwing off. I don't know if the Cowboys' operational security was like bad. Like everything that happened to them that was like negative in the draft, like I don't think had to do with the fact that the teams knew that the Cowboys wanted Tet McMillan. They would have taken Tetsuo McMillan. Yeah. I mean, I think the Panthers needed a Tetsuo McMillan. So, and then after that, the Cowboys were clearly able to kind of draft who they wanted without any problem. I mean, they got good steals on their next two picks after the first round. So, I think really the only thing I can kind of take away is that they're gonna lean back in heavily with using their head coaches. Using their position coaches to kind of for information to kind of feed the scouts, and I think that they're going to look for guys that they feel like have the best chance to reach their ceiling, meaning high football character guys that love football that will work at it.
I got another takeaway that I wanted to share with you. I'm just done looking at prospects that are like below average arm length, because clearly Will McClay he looks at those guys and just kind of like rolls his eyes. Will Johnson, who had some other stuff going on, but 30-inch arms. We thought there were other people out there that thought maybe he could be an option at 12. He wasn't even an option at 44 for them. And then you look at their first three picks. I'm going to read you the percentile, Landon, of their wingspan. Okay. Mm-hmm. Tyler Booker, 96 percentile. Donovan Ezeraku, 85th percentile. Savon Ravel, 94th percentile. They care about arm length and wingspan, and we just need to factor that in when we start looking at these players like next year. They're just not going to draft small players at positions like offensive tackle, edge, and corner.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's one of those things where arm length is part of athleticism, and arm length is one of those things where we can debate hand size with quarterbacks and the correlation between that and fumbles or whatever. But to me, arm length is not debatable, right? Arm length is simply a geometry physics problem issue, right? Like if you've got guys with wider wingspans with longer arms. On defense, it's easier to close down passing windows. It's easier to make tackles. It's easier to keep blockers off of your body so that you can move freely. On offense, it's easier to reach those defenders. It's easier to get your hands on those. It creates a wider catch radius. So I think that arm length is a great equalizer in athleticism, right? Because even if you're not quite as athletic, if you've got an inch or two of length more than the next guy, that's an inch or two closer that you are to arriving to where you need to be, or getting closer to the ball, or putting your hands on a defender. So I think that length is an important aspect for a whole bunch of different reasons on both sides of the ball, and is something that I think it's easy for us to poo-poo when we like a player that doesn't have good length. But I think that it is something that should be measured and accounted for on the same level as athleticism, because I think it can be something that kind of mitigates a lack of athleticism, or in some cases like Ravel, it really accentuates that athleticism. It makes you a good athlete become outstanding because he can get that much closer, that much further, and get his hands on the football.
I've got one more takeaway that I wanted to throw at you. We see every year, I just saw a mock draft today where the Cowboys are drafting a running back in round 1. Since the Ezekiel Elliott pick, it seems like there has been a fundamental change in the front office as to how they view the running back position. Now they'll spend some money. They'll put the franchise tag on a Tony Pollard. I just don't think this team is going to spend premium picks at that position anymore. And the fact is they've drafted one running back inside of the top, I think 150 picks since 2017. And that was Tony Pollard, who I think was picked like 124 back in 2019. They seem perfectly content just to wait until day 3. A lot of people were predicting throughout the draft process, like, hey, round 2, round 3, that's where the Cowboys absolutely have to take a running back. Not only did they not do that, they didn't draft one in round 4, and they didn't trade up for one in round 5 either. So I'm just going to ignore the noise of them taking an early round running back until they do it again.
Well, I'll add a little bit onto that. I don't know that the Cowboys are necessarily interested in going back to a bell cow system anymore, right? Because they haven't really done it the last few years, despite what they could tell you last year. They certainly weren't doing it mostly last year. They were rotating guys. The year before that, obviously it was Zeke and Pollard. They were pairing those guys together. And much like the idea of not necessarily of learning their lesson, maybe about paying second contracts and about drafting running backs high, having more than one viable running back mitigates injury, mitigates potential contract problems, mitigates a lot of different issues. So I think for them, they looked at this situation like, if we're going to run a committee, drafting a guy a little bit later gives us an opportunity to get really good value on a juice back, and then we can cobble together the rest of the room as we needed with the kind of available running backs that are on the market and that are later in the draft.
I will say there's a small caveat. I wouldn't be surprised if they got somebody who was just so much better than the rest of the running back room if they just leaned on that guy, but they clearly don't. They don't.
They're not targeting that, right? Like that's not their plan A. I think if it happens, they'll allow it, but I don't think that that's what they're going.
I don't think they're saying, "Hey, we need a feature back that we can play 95% of the snaps." I think if they fall into that, they'll lean into it, but I don't think it's a goal of theirs.
And they would have drafted someone high if that was the case, right? Like that's where you would have gone for an Amarian Hampton or one of those guys, Caleb Johnson up top.
All right, let's get to some more questions, including who's more likely to get a second contract from the Cowboys, Jalen Tolbert or Jake Ferguson? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Did you know that your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to go. Dive into hundreds of premium titles, including EA Sports, College Football 25, or Call of Duty Black Ops 6, my favorite game right now. You can play them as easily as you stream your favorite TV shows. There's been so many times where I'm traveling where I would love to play a game of Call of Duty or of College Football 25, but I don't want the hassle of packing up my Xbox. So all I've got to do is plug in my Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K device, and I am ready to go. Head over to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K, Fire TV Stick 4K Max, and Fire TV Cube. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are answering your Twitter questions, and we've got another question from Gorn. He always gives us such great questions. Next one: who is more likely to earn a second contract with the Cowboys, Jalen Tolbert or Jake Ferguson?
This is an interesting question because I think it actually opens up to a larger kind of conversation that I wanted to have as well, which is that, you know, with Dak Prescott as the quarterback, it feels like the tight end is the second wide receiver that we need to kind of account for. I think that if Jake Ferguson has a good season this year, the kind of season that we kind of expected him to have last season, then I think he's the more likely of the two to get the contract. I think his deal would probably be cheaper than what a wide receiver 2 would be. I don't know if it would be cheaper than maybe what Tolbert's contract necessarily would
Correct.
be, but I do think that I probably would feel more comfortable paying someone like Ferguson after seeing multiple years of production, really only 1 year in which he kind of regressed a little bit from the previous season. And just because I know that Dak has a level of comfort throwing to tight ends in general, and that's a needed position, especially with what you're doing. I don't know that I would necessarily guarantee that either of these guys get a second contract. But I think of the two, it's a lot easier for me to see a pathway to Ferguson getting that second contract, unless Tolbert wants to sign some really team-friendly, cheap deal midway through the season, which, you know, I mean, I certainly don't think that's outside the realm of possibility.
So this one's really tough. So let's talk about kind of where their value is at right now. So I'm going to name some players that I think are similar to Jalen Tolbert. You tell me if you disagree. So these are all receivers that were paid this offseason: Josh Palmer, Diami Brown, Tutu Atwell. You think Jalen Tolbert's in that tier?
I think that's probably fair, right? Yeah. Tutu Atwell's probably on the top end of that tier, right?
Okay. I mean, Tutu Atwell was like the fourth receiver for the Rams last year. Diami Brown was a part-time player for Washington, and Josh Palmer is a part-time player for the Chargers who got paid for the Bills. I think, like, statistically, Tolbert matches up with each of those players very well.
Yeah.
All three of those receivers made $10 million per year in free agency.
Yep. Yeah, Tutu specifically signed a 1 year, $10 million deal, if I'm not mistaken. So
now, if you go up higher in the list, you're looking at players like Gabe Davis, Darnell Mooney, Khalil Shakir. Those receivers all receive $13 million per year this offseason. I don't know if Tolbert's there yet, but I think if you put together a 800-yard season with 6 touchdowns, he probably is.
Which is probably what I would, project for him this year. He was in somewhere in the 650 range last year. I think he had 8 or 9 touchdowns. I think depending on where he falls in the pecking order of the wide receivers, I think that's not outrageous to suggest that he can do 800 yards.
So again, to me, that seems like a lot of money for Jalen Tolbert, a guy that you're actively trying to replace as your wide receiver too. But again, if he has a decent year, I can see him getting that. The tight end market is really funny because there's almost like no middle class. So we got a couple of big deals over the last 2 weeks. George Kittle got $23 million a year. Trey McBride's at 19, and then it drops off to like Pat Freiermuth getting $12 million a year. Cole Kmet getting $12 million. Mike Gesicki got a contract from Cincinnati this year that's paying him $8.5 million. So if we just split it and
That's
call it
crazy.
10, right? Again, this is if Ferguson has a good year and earns it. He's getting Taysom Hill money, which is $10 million a year.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost expect it to fall a little bit higher than that, just with a year of
But
we'll see about the
but
contracts.
higher
I
than
mean,
that is Travis Kelce, TJ
well,
Hawkins,
no,
and Mark Andrews.
what I was going to argue is that I do think that actually Ferguson is probably the one guy in that list that does actually fall between those guys to me, right? Like he's the one that I feel like has the argument to be made to be like, hey, I am the middle class tight end. Like,
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
let me give you a name.
Yeah.
David Njoku is
Mhm.
making $13.6 million a year,
Mm-hmm.
and I think
Yeah,
Njoku is a better player than Ferguson.
I think that that's an appropriate amount, though, right? Like, I think that 13 amount. That's probably. I'm not that I would necessarily pay Ferguson that, but I think that's not. That's probably a good starting point to have the conversation. Above 10 million, below 13, right? Like somewhere in there. I think to me is like. I do think that Ferguson should be the one of the few guys to kind of venture into that middle class because I think he's one of the few guys that fits in there.
So you're right, and I think looking at those two contracts, let's say it's $12 million for Ferguson.
Yeah,
like it's the deal that Cole Kmet got a couple years
Yeah.
ago. Cole Kmet got 4 years, $50 million from Chicago.
It got replaced in this draft. Yeah.
Well, yes, I want to get to that in a second. I think that is a much more appealing deal to me than paying Jalen Tolbert $10 million a year.
For sure.
Having said that, and you said at the top of the segment, the tight end functions as the number 2 receiver in this offense.
That's right.
And I just think they need to be more dynamic at that position. Now, it's hard to do that because there's only a few of those guys in the league. But I do wonder if the Cowboys should explore trying to get somebody that can make them tougher to defend. Because I like Jake Ferguson, but he's not a supreme athlete. He's a 4'8" guy that's pretty decent after the catch, but not special. I do wonder, like, maybe they should be chasing a little bit more upside there.
Hey, man. Who was I trying to get us to draft all season?
I know. I
tried. Listen. I don't think it's outrageous.
We took a guard at 12 instead. I get it.
I don't hate the pick there, but I think that people thought that I was crazy to suggest a tight end when we needed a pass catcher, and guys, tight end is a pass catcher. Like in Dak's offense, it's a pretty heavily relied upon pass catcher. So. I mean, I don't disagree. And I think, really what they may want to start doing is kind of looking at this as a cumulative and just start targeting more tight ends, right? Like maybe Schoonmaker takes a step in the sense that you're not taking over Ferguson, but you're also, in addition to eating into some of those wide receiver two targets, and giving them to your second tight end, maybe running more double tight end, which I think makes sense with kind of, what you want to do in the run game. So it will be interesting to see how they kind of develop this offense, how things will change targeting wise. But yeah, I do think that I think tight end to me is higher on the pecking order in general than wide receiver 2.
And again, we're projecting that both of these players have better years than they had in 2024. Certainly Jake Ferguson, who had a down year. But I'm even wondering, like, maybe the Cowboys with their current contract should maybe try to avoid having several players in this middle class right now. When you have so many top tier contracts and you're going to have another one in Micah Parsons, maybe this is where you save a little bit. You let Jake Ferguson walk. You rely on Luke Schoonmaker. You rely on Brevin Spanford. Then you draft somebody, and that's how you can kind of save yourself some cap space.
I think if Schoon takes a step, you can start considering that. But the problem with treating tight end like wide receiver or some of these other positions,
it's hard to
replace. It takes a long time to develop these guys, right?
Yeah.
And so,
but that's why I think I would, at that point, I'm only paying guys that I feel like have maybe top 7, top 8 upside. The guys that are just in the middle, like in the Dalton Schultz range, who the Cowboys franchised once, twice, maybe you're better off just moving on at that point.
But what you don't want to do is let Jake walk before Schoon's ready and then not have anything else. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the one area, because you can't get stuck where you're relying on a rookie tight end, because it's just one of these positions that you can't rely on a rookie on.
All right, let's talk about the Cowboys' 2 biggest needs going into the offseason. Did they fix them? We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. The NFL draft is over, but the roster moves never stops. Hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, this last question comes from Jake. He said, Marcus Landon, you guys did a show after the season talking about the Cowboys' two biggest needs: number 2 pass catcher and stopping the run. Did they address those needs this offseason?
I don't know how. I mean, the pass catcher thing is obviously, look, we're still talking about it. So clearly, the problem has not been solved completely yet. They're still kind of very much actively working on that situation. I do think that they have improved their run defense, from where it was last year. But I think that in order to kind of show that, you have to look back to where we were a year ago today, right? So just going back to where this defense was a year ago today, Chauncey Golson was your backup defensive tackle, and Chauncey Golson is a good player, certainly a nice defensive end, but not a run stuffing defensive tackle type. You had Mozzie Smith and Justin Rogers, who was the 7th round pick, as your backup to Mozzie Smith, who was at that point still a year away from having some really good snaps. We've since seen Mozzie this season, put together a couple of some good series and start to look like the player that maybe that got drafted, with the hope being that this offseason, a full offseason of being healthy, you're getting the best version of Mozzie Smith that you've seen so far. So I think losing DeMarcus Lawrence obviously is the main issue there. But I think that one of the reasons that you let a guy like DeMarcus Lawrence leave is because you feel positive things about the development of Marshawn Nealon. You're hoping that Sam Williams comes back as a bigger and stronger player, like he looked like he was before the injury. I think that you've solidified the linebacker room in a way that it probably was not solidified. I mean, again, just look at the depth chart compared to where it was last year. Damone Clark was your starter at will linebacker, and now he's probably your 5th linebacker, right? And Justin Rogers was a 7th round pick rookie, was your backup nose tackle, and now he's like your 3rd backup nose tackle. You've drafted a guy in the 4th round that's 330 pounds plus. And there's still guys available on the street, and I still think they will probably go sign a Linval Joseph type player, right? Because there's 5 of these guys that are 35 plus and 330 pounds that are looking for their $5 to $8 million 1-year contract this season, and the Cowboys could be one of those teams. So I do think that they have overall, improved the run defense, but I also think it's been kind of by nibbling around the edges a little bit, and they also aren't done. I think that there is still work to be done as far as signing some of these last few finishing pieces as rotational nose tackles, that sort of thing.
See, I actually disagree, and it's for a couple of reasons. Number one, you lost probably your best tackling secondary player in Jordan Lewis, and I do think having a good slot corner that can tackle does matter in the run game. Eric Kendricks was on this roster.
But you replaced it with Izzy McCwamu, though, right? Who's not exactly a slouch as a tackle.
I mean, we just don't know who the slot corner is going to be yet, right? I mean,
okay, so that's an unknown then, probably.
Okay, I just think losing Jordan Lewis hurts, right?
That's fair.
They had Eric Kendricks at this time last year, and I think Eric Kendricks, he had flaws in coverage, but still was a good run defender, right? You had a healthier DeMarvion Overshown, who was at least participating in the OTAs and mini camps and training camps. He's obviously a major question mark. And then I talked about Lawrence. We don't have to get into Tank, but they also had Golston, who was just somebody else that could provide some flexibility as an edge defender, defensive tackle. I think at the minimum, they haven't gotten better. I think there's a chance that they've gotten worse. But I think the Cowboys are hoping that Marshawn Nealon is better in year 2. I think they're hoping that Mozzie Smith, and we should have mentioned Oso Digizua, who's still a relatively young player. I think he's going into year 5 at this point. I think they're hoping those guys can continue to get better. And then obviously, I'm sure they believe the scheme playing in Matt Eberflus's defense will help them there. Although we really liked Mike Zimmer a year ago as well. So I don't know. I think I think to me, it's a major question mark. I just won't be shocked if we get into September and their run defense is a major issue once again.
I think that Thomas is at least a wash on Mozzie, if not an upgrade, specifically in the run game, right? Like, I don't know about as a pass rusher, but I think that Thomas is at least a lateral move for that player. The Lawrence stuff, like, look, they're looking to replace him, with talent upgrade there. So, and that's the issue. That's the real problem here, is that ultimately the real methodology that they're using to upgrade their roster here is improvement in the offseason, which we just haven't seen yet. So we have to kind of get some more input there in order to kind of have any idea how much better how good is Sam Williams, how much better is Nealon, how much have some of these younger players grown, how much better is Leofau than he was last year, right? Which I think
Leofau could be your Kendricks replacement. I think that's the hope,
for sure,
right?
For sure. So I think that's why it's an unknown. I think the Lewis McCwamu question is legitimate. So I think as far as run defense, right? So I think there's just a lot of unknown here. So it's hard to completely answer the question. I think it's fair to say that we can both agree that they didn't clearly upgrade the situation than they did last year, and ready-made personnel. I do think that there is a chance that as the season goes on, this is a lot better run defense than it was at the end of last season.
Yeah, and to answer the question, there's no doubt that they didn't improve the wide receiver 2 spot. They lost Brandon Cooks, although he didn't contribute in a big way last year. You just have one fewer receiver in that room that you feel good about. And the Cowboys are clearly working on it now, so we'll see if they're able to get it done. Yeah. That is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. We'll see you guys back here on Monday when we continue breaking down the Cowboys 2025 draft class.